Started here, then I will give you a short introduction and then you can take it away. So, welcome everyone. I am happy you came out to this rather idiosyncratic Praxis event. Our speaker today is John Cochrane. He is the Rosa Marie and Jack Anderson Senior Fellow of the Hoover Institute at Stanford University. His current research focuses on inflation, with the fiscal theory of the price level to be published this fall by Princeton University Press. In the past, he has also written on asset pricing as well as health insurance, time series econometrics, financial regulation, and other topics. Before coming to Hoover, Cochrane was a professor of finance at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, and prior to that at its economics department. Cochrane earned a bachelor's degree in physics at MIT and a PhD in economics at the University of California at Berkeley. His greatest honor was to be elected president of the American Finance Association. Cochrane also writes the Grumpy Economist blog. Asked for his favorite economist, Cochrane answered, "My favorite economist would mix parts of Milton Friedman, Robert Lucas, Eugene Fama, Lars Hansen, and Thomas Sowell." So won't you welcome John Cochrane.
Thank you. The Dr. Frankenstein approach to creating my favorite economist. I'm going to show you some slides. Oh no, somebody has to make me co-host so I can show you some slides.
There you go. You should be able to share now.
There we go. Now, can I find the right ones? As you can tell I taught in a business school for 20 years. I can't get out of bed without finding some showing some slides. So the talk, my big project lately has been about inflation, and I'm not going to talk about that. As my second big project is I want to, you can tell from the title, Free to Grow. This is a obvious allusion to Milton and Rose Friedman's Free to Choose. And that is my next project, Free to Choose. If you haven't read it, just leave now and go read it. It is a gorgeous and capitalism and freedom. They really set the agenda for freedom going. But it's let's not say an update. Well, an update. There's lots of things going on in the economy. Growth being one of them that Milton Friedman didn't know about, just because we've learned a whole lot since then. And there's a whole bunch more issues that we are facing today that they didn't get to. So that's really the uniting theme of the, now, why do growth is, as you'll see, the most important thing in the world. Why do I work on inflation? Well, in life, you don't work on what's most important. You work on what you have something to contribute to. And I had something to contribute. I had some answers about inflation, I only can repackage what brilliant other people have taught me about growth. But anyway, this is the next book to come. So go buy it when it comes out. So let me set the stage with the main issue. Here is a graph of U.S. real GDP, which GDP is the same as national income per capita. By the way, this is from the Fred data set. If you don't know about that, you should learn about it. Easy way to get all sorts of data. Now you may, if you read the New York Times and Paul Krugman's column, reading of which caused me to be called the Grumpy Economist after I spilled my coffee one Sunday morning, you might think that the 1950s were a wonderful panacea of prosperity in the US. Well, here are the numbers. What does real GDP and income look like? Starting in 1947, about $15,000 per person. These are inflation adjusted, now $60,000. We are unimaginably better off than our parents or grandparents or grandparents were in the 1950s. This is the signature feature of our economy for the today and for the last couple of centuries. This amazing process of long-run growth from 15,000 to 30,000 around 1980 to about 60,000 now. Long-term growth overwhelms everything else. Here, the bit wiggles here. You read about recessions in the newspaper. There's a recession coming. These little wiggles are recessions. 1980 was the horrible one. Here's the financial crisis. It's a pretty big recession. And the sad part is we never really recovered from it, but we did keep growing. There, of course, is COVID, which I like to think of as the great national snowstorm. It really wasn't a classic recession. We shut down the economy for a while. It had huge, look at that, huge decline in GDP. But, at the bottom, it's still only as bad as things were in 2014. And we're right back on the trend line, no greater than the trend line now. So growth, the difference between 15,000 and 60,000 is just enormous. And that is the most important economic issue, how to keep this going. Where did it come from? How to keep it going? It vastly overwhelms recessions, vastly overwhelms, all the things we talk about, who's going to pay for your babysitter, stuff like that. It's just nothing like long growth. Inequality, the poor people and the rich people in 1950 were poorer than the poor people today. And now GDP, I'm often sensitive for attacks on the left. Says, oh, GDP, it's a terrible measure. It is a terrible measure. But if anything, GDP is a vast understatement of the increase in prosperity and quality of life that Americans and people around the globe have experienced in the last couple of hundred years. So GDP measures the value of what is produced and incomes at market prices. What do you do about Google Maps? Google Maps is free. You used to have to actually buy maps, and that was counted as GDP. And then they had GPS units you had to buy, that was counted as GDP. Now it's free. Zero GDP being produced in Google Maps. Well, but we get the benefits of Google Maps, all of that for free. So if you've taken an economics course, the right concept is consumer surplus, and that is vastly higher than the actual GDP. So when people on the left tell you, oh, GDP, it's just profit. No, it's actually a vast understatement of the benefits we have from the great quality of stuff we have. Now, we don't, 1950, the wealth, the $60,000 you have now, it's not that everybody has 3 1957 Chevys parked out in the front yard. You have one way better current car, and you don't have 3 1950 vacuum tube computers. You have one really good laptop. Again, it's that vastly better stuff. And health, lifespans have increased. We are much healthier. The air is much cleaner. People like to tell a story of capitalism and environmental degradation. Is absolutely not true. Health, but you got to be able to afford that stuff. That stuff comes from that is highly correlated with GDP. Poor countries are very dirty countries, and they're countries where people die of easily preventable diseases. So all this stuff that doesn't really get counted in GDP, but GDP is a good measure of all the wonderful things that have happened to us. Here's a longer perspective. I went back to 1776 for sort of reverence for the founders. I had a similar version of this talk given to a group that was talking about the Constitution. It's not quite zero, but it's pretty darn close. Just the vast increase in living standards of all sorts. Back to GDP per capita. This one, now let's look across countries. Here is the US the US on the top line, the same line as I showed you before. I included Israel because I happen to give this talk in Israel, so always give it to the audience. But Italy, a place that I love dearly, is a important reminder. Italy was trundling along. It was growing about the same as the US, kind of catching up to the US. And then starting around 2000, look at that. GDP per capita has declined in Italy. This is an unbelievable tragedy, and it can happen here. I didn't bring up Venezuela and North Korea, Cuba, there's basket cases around the world. This was an advanced Western country that had done well, and then the golden goose kind of stopped laying eggs. And that can happen to us. The other thing this graph points out is, so one of the big lessons here is when you read in the newspapers, you read about growth rates, GDP growth. What really matters is the level. Growth rates accumulate to the level, but for one thing, they keep saying, "Oh, China, the wonderful economy of China, it's growing so fast." There is China, under 10,000. China's 1/7 as productive as the United States per capita. Now, the level is, you add up 1/7 per capita times a billion people. The Chinese economy has a lot of stuff. They can build some aircraft carriers, which are an issue for us internationally. But the Chinese economy, its great growth rate is because it started from horrible poverty. And South Korea is an example of where China's going. It's catching up towards the United States, but the level differences are still enormous. Two lessons here: the differences across countries are enormous, and sometimes things that go badly. Here's another picture of China. What happened to China? Whoa, boom! There's real GDP relative to the U.S. Boom, but it's catching up from abject poverty to sort of lower middle income status on average. There's rich parts and there's poor parts. There's still a lot of poor parts of China. A less understood fact. Here I divided everybody by the US. So the US, notice the vertical scale, 0 to 0.9, US is 1.0. So this is where is everyone relative to the US. Here's the tragedy, the wonder of Italy from 0.6 to 0.9. So a quick catch up in what they called the economic miracle of the 1950s and 1960s. And then stagnation. That can happen. Israel just trundles along about the same. This is South Korea. This is catch-up growth, and this is China beginning catch-up growth. So one of the important principles of growth theory is that the frontier nation, the U.S., does things, right for the moment, is as productive as any other is more productive than any other large economy in the world. One strategy for other countries is to catch up, so they can achieve great growth rates by starting really poor and then learning to do things the way the US does. And that's the process China is coming on. But they always seem to, they catch up, and I should have put Japan on here. It used to be, Japan, it's gonna overwhelm us. Well, it caught up and then bing, got stuck a little below us. And that's common. The phenomenon is simple. You kind of adopt some US institutions and then stop on the way. So I hope I persuaded you. Long run growth is the most important thing out there, far outweighing every other economic issue that you read about in the newspapers, and you never read about this one in the newspapers. Now, I am the grumpy economist, and the saddest fact, sort of to put together your feelings of end of empire or dissolution of the American Republic or whatever you want to feel when you're grumpy and old and depressed like me, growth is slowing down. And a lot. So I put this on a log scale. So notice 12, 16, notice how the scale goes up and starts getting compressed. By putting it on a log scale, constant growth is a straight line. So you can see how from 1950 through 2000, there was a straight line in logs or exponential growth in levels. That was lovely. And then starting right around 2000, really in the great financial crisis, and again now, this growth rate has slowed down. Now, that is a huge loss. The difference between the red line and the blue line is much bigger than even the depths of COVID, is much bigger than the financial crisis. The amount we have lost already by the growth slowdown is just I can't do it. It's probably like we'd probably be at 60. I'm going to guesstimate that's about 90 to 100 that we should be at now, and we're not. That's a huge difference, not just in your standard of living, not just in how much stuff you can buy, but if you'd like, how much the government takes in taxes. It's probably not that many big left-wingers here, but I'll appeal to your left-wing brother-in-law or sister or whatever. How much can the government transfer to run social programs? That's here, and that's completely lost. Another way of putting that is now I am going to transform to growth rates. So this is the level. Let's look at the growth rates here. These are growth rates. I used potential GDP, which is really is just a very smooth version of GDP. So at the times here when you can see the economy is growing well, here referred to as growth rates. Let's start in the 1950s. This is the end of the war, but around the 1950s and 1960s, right after World War II, the US was growing at 4% a year over a couple decades. Then the 1970s came along. Now, ancient history for you. I was actually alive then. It was not a great time. Stagflation, really embarrassing hairstyles and clothing, Vietnam War, stuff like that. The US and the first big growth slowdown, we're down to 3.5, 3.2. The 1980s saw a little bit of a resurgence, but then late 1990s with the internet boom, there's a little resurgence in there, maybe with 3, but a long period of like down from 4 to 3.2 or so. And then this is what I mentioned, starting in 2000, boom, look at that, we're down under 2% a year. And 4 versus 2, it's excited, but that's, you start compounding things at 2% versus 4%. And let that go a couple of decades, and that is a huge disaster. One way of putting that disaster, I made this is just shows you I can program a computer to go e to the RT. But let's think about what's going to happen over the next 80 years. So that's just to make you. I started us at $50,000 a year per capita in 2020 to make round numbers. And then let's just imagine what happens if we grow at 4%, like we did. It is possible for the US economy to grow at 4%. Chinese economy has been growing 7, 8%, so certainly something we ought to think about. Versus 3%, versus our current 2%, versus what if things get even worse and the number of permits you need to do anything doubles, as they're trying hard to do. 1%. Well, these small, I made this graph to make these small differences in long run growth rates salient for the level, which is what matters. If the economy grows at 1% for the next 80 years, the 50 that you have, your probably great grandchildren will have 111. And that's not bad. It's doubling. It's not bad. 2%, 248. Well, that's a lot nice. 200 wouldn't. The average American who earns 50 grand a year, wouldn't it be lovely if their great grandchild had $248,000 a year in real terms? 3%, 551. 4%, 1227. Exponential growth adds up, don't it? This is the only important question if you're thinking about long-term economics and the long term. If you want to worry about the budget deficit, the government raising taxes doesn't do a lot of good. Well, where you get revenue is tax revenue times income. So let's get some more income, and you can pay off the debt and pay grandma's Social Security and all that other stuff that's in trouble, or you can pay for the environment, or whatever you want to do with it. There's a lot more money here if we would grow faster than grow slower. That is the economic question. And what are these little lines here? See these tiny little blue lines here? At least around Stanford's campus, everyone's really excited about climate change. Oh, sorry, I got the words. Global warming. No. Oh, I'm sorry, climate change. No, I'm sorry, climate catastrophe, climate emergency. What are we supposed to say these days? You're at Hillsdale. You guys don't know. You're really probably low back on your PC language. Well, whatever the climate thing that is the most pressing existential challenge for humanity. Well, it is. Climate is changing. Let's not deny it. It's there. Carbon's out there. It's getting warmer. It's probably not a good thing that it's getting warmer. But all the IPCC reports, you add it up and put your fingers on the scale. The best you can do is about 5% of GDP in the year 2100, which coincidentally is where my graph stops. So let's compare the potential damage of completely no climate policy whatsoever. Let everything run. That's 5% of GDP. That's what these little thin lines are 5% below the other lines. So you want to worry about the economy in the year 2100. Let's compare long-term growth to the ravages of the upcoming climate catastrophe. I don't mean to denigrate climate. It's just compared to long-run growth, like everything else. It's just 5% of GDP in 80 years is just a nothing burger economic issue. So it's important, but don't overdo it. Now, where does growth come from? Let me show you some evidence before we do some theory. So this is I used the World Bank Ease of Doing Business rankings. Unfortunately, this lovely thing fell apart in a great political scandal because the head of the people in charge were found bowing to China to make them look better, but it used to be a good thing. And the point here is really, I just wanted you to see so countries are scored, and they're scored by things like how easy is it to start a business, how easy is it to get construction permits. See the house behind me? Took 4 years to get the permits for residential rehab in lovely Palo Alto. Getting electricity, registering property, getting credit. There's something where the United States we're not actually that great, by the way, on many measures of ease of doing business. New Zealand is a lot better than us. Denmark is a lot better than us. Why is that? These countries have very high tax rates. They understand that if you want to squeeze the golden goose, you got to let her lay some eggs. We have much more regulatory environment, other than getting credit, which is perhaps something where the US is a little too good than other places. Witness student loan fiascos, protecting minor property investors, stuff like that. How easy is it to do a business? So here is a graph of the ease of doing business index versus GDP per capita across countries. And you can see a remarkable correlation. Now, as my critics have pointed out, correlation is not causation, but there is a remarkable correlation between the ease of doing business and the productivity of a country. Now, notice on this graph, the immense variation on the vertical scale. We are not talking about recessions here. We're not talking about a couple percent one way or another. We're not talking about the 5% ravages of climate change. We're talking about going from about $350 per person in the Central African Republic up to $60,000 in the USA. These are, I know this must be like Liechtenstein or Bahrain, places with kind of big numbers. USA is doing pretty good at $60,000. I showed you Israel. There's China. So there's the USA 60. China here is just a little bit below 10. India is worse, it's a couple thousand. These are immense differences. I mean, and just worrying about the inequality within one versus the other is tiny versus worrying about the difference between the average person earning $2,000 and the average person earning $60,000. Just the enormous differences in productivity across countries. And by the way, I put in these other ones here because these are places that you can obviously, they're outliers and you can tell where they're going. Georgia and Rwanda were both places that were poor and reformed quickly. Well, this may have been Georgia before Russia invaded. Rwanda had some big reforms, and they moved from here to here, and one can hope that they'll move up. Venezuela and Libya are both places that moved rapidly left in the ease of doing business, and you can bet that they're going to go down. So this gives you a hint. I think something that's, and this is also verified by legions of academic research. Where does growth, where does prosperity come from? It comes from, roughly speaking, the ease of doing business. I made this graph in part. These are two regression lines, two different ways of fitting the data, and this is the more conservative of them. But the USA, as you noticed, is not the leader in all these things. So an index of 100 on each score is the best observed somewhere in the world. So you could achieve 100 by simply adopting the best practice of every country in the world. This is not pie in the sky libertarian nirvana. So there's the frontier country, which would be actually a lot, 60, we're over 100. The US could, by this calculation, double our GDP per capita right now, just by adopting the best practices everywhere around the world. For example, I saw a calculation, residential zoning makes property in California ridiculously expensive. And one thing that does is it means that people, especially poor people, especially people of lower opportunities who want to move to where the good jobs are, can't do it. So if you get rid of residential zoning and unite people with jobs, then you can kind of estimate how much will those people gain by moving to where the jobs are. The numbers come out to about 15% of GDP. So we could raise GDP by about 15% per capita just by getting rid of residential zoning. Now, 15%, remember, climate change was 3 to 5%. 15% right there is the cost of residential zoning. That's the kind of calculation that this suggests. So we could do in the US. Here's the time series. India actually is on its way of getting better. Its ease of business went from 45 to 56 in the 2000s. It's moving up here. Now, 45 to 56 isn't a lot, but it's something. And along the way, it's per capita GDP. Now, the author of this table didn't know that you don't use logs on a graph that you're going to put in public circulation. So you have to go eat of that on your own, but you can see the upward slope. So this is true across countries, and it's also true across time that when countries liberalize and have better ease of doing business, they grow economically. This is North versus South Korea. And in a sense, no, there is a North Korea. See that dark spot there? That's where there's land and there's no electricity. That's South Korea. The good Lord has been kind enough, or at least just cruel enough, to leave us some controlled experiments on the planet of countries with almost identical cultures, initial conditions, and then we have a controlled experiment on one kind of economics versus another kind of economics. And North versus South Korea shows you the result of that controlled experiment on what socialism or state-directed economies do relative to relatively free economies. They plunge you in the cold, the dark, and the hunger. What's really amazing from an economic point of view is that not so much that ease of doing business can improve the economy so much, but that bad business practices can hurt the economy so much. How can governments do so much damage? As I'm kind of a emergent order libertarian at heart, but the emergent order up against the power of the state to ruin economies is really pretty amazing. So let's talk a little about, this was all the introduction. What are some lessons here? Where does growth come from? All growth is what we normally call supply. Most of what you talk about in the newspaper, stimulus, inflation, recessions, taxes, taxes as far as redistribution kinds of taxes, all of that stuff really isn't really about, that's all demand that gets in and out of recessions, up and down a couple of percentage points, but where it comes from is supply. And supply is productivity. The one place, how do you get from where was it? How do you get from here to here? From where are we? Let's do from 15 to 60. You don't get from 15 to 60 by fiscal stimulus. You don't get from 15 to 60 by printing money and just counting on stuff. The problem with the US economy in 1945 was not that the government didn't know how to print enough money and hand it out. You don't get it by redistribution. So, my great-grandfather was great. You look back long enough for all of us, our great-great-grandparents were either farmers or poor industrial workers. You don't, if you go back to, suppose your great-great-grandfather was a coal miner in 1880, you are not wealthy now because he negotiated a better deal. His union got him paid 50 cents a day rather than 20 cents a day. We're better off because now there's a coal mining machine. Well, there used to be a coal mining machine. Now there's a windmill machine, and you and I do something more productive with our time. It's all productivity, the ability of each of us to produce more per hour. And that comes from science, from technical knowledge, but more importantly, from the ability to take that science and put it to work. Pure science alone doesn't do good unless someone can take those ideas and put them into new products, new way of doing things, new processes. And that typically means new companies, and everybody hates growth. A good example that you're familiar with will be Uber versus taxis. Uber was a disruptive company, and it put a lot of taxi companies out of business, and you get better taxi rides, in part because we utilize privately owned cars better, in part because it's a more flexible way of the labor force. And the taxi companies hated it, and the governments hated it. People hate disruptive companies. They come all let's look at retail. Amazon looks like it's threatening Walmart. Walmart's unhappy. Walmart put A&P out of business. A&P was unhappy. A&P, you probably never heard of, but it put all the little mom and pop stores out of business, and they were all unhappy. And we get incredibly cheap stuff. Cheap stuff from China is another part of productivity. That's where it comes from. Now, there's a fun debate going on in economics. If you do growth theory, there's a real question about this slowdown in growth. Is this because our economy is getting less efficient, or is it because we've just run out of ideas? Can exponential growth continue? By the way, this is not, your friends on the left will say, oh, we got a degrowth because of the environment and so on and so forth. That's actually not true. What is valuable to people uses less and less resources these days. We are moving to a services economy where I give a Zoom talk to you and you give a Zoom talk to me, and that's incredibly valuable. And hopefully the great future I see is in biotech. I mean, we all live pretty comfortable lives, but we could live longer and healthier lives. And that is a service that requires very few of the Earth's precious raw materials to produce. But we could learn how to do that a whole lot better. So where does it all come from? So you need productivity. Productivity comes from better ways of doing things. Those come from innovative companies that are able to disrupt the powers that be. And those in turn come from competition, rule of law, property rights, from a economy, from a society that is a society of rights, not a society of permissions. If you need permission to start a new business, the existing businesses will find a way to stop you. If you have the right to start a new business, it's much easier for you to do that and start the new business that cleans the clock of the existing ones. So what this talk is supposed to be about, turns out it's not going to be, but I'm going to send you to the Grumpy Economist blog or to the upcoming Free to Grow. How do we do this in detail in policies, in the issues that are important to us today? And in each case, there's sort of a left-right argument. The left says, oh, you heartless capitalist pig. The right says, oh, you socialist monster. But there is the right answer is actually cuts the middle and doesn't just say one or the other party, one of the other partisan talking lines. Regulation is a big problem. We live in the Republic of Paper. Even the New York Times is figuring this out. If you want to put in a windmill project and a high power line to connect those windmills to New York City, turns out it takes 15 years to get the permits, and the environmental suits stop you all the way. So the decarbonized economy is run. This is where there's some hope. The left has figured out that all of the permits. My state of California wanted to put in a high-speed train in order to save the climate 15 years ago. They have not laid a single mile of track. So regulation needs fixing, but it's not more or less. We need regulation that is smarter, that is, and there a regulatory reform effort is going to be the answer. Simple things like a shot clock. Simple things like every 10 years, you got to look back and see if the darn thing is working or not. Simple things like you're allowed to challenge regulation in court rather than the regulatory agency being cop, prosecutor, judge, jury, and executioner all into one, which is the way it works now. Healthcare and health insurance, there's 20-25% of the economy. And if you have ever seen a health insurance bill, it only takes one to tell you how incredibly screwed up the US health insurance and healthcare system is. I just went to see my dermatologist. I saw her for 5 minutes and the bill was $7,000 before the insurance discount and all the rest of it. You can tell this is screwed up. In fact, health is a personal service, sort of like taxes, and there's no reason why it can't be provided by the private market. And there are ways. The whole pre-existing conditions problem is a creature of regulations gone bad. One of the common problems is each regulation is there to patch the problems of the previous regulation, not to patch an underlying problem of the economy. But even pre-existing conditions can be handled easily by privatized health and healthcare. Taxes are a big problem. And here I want to mention this because this is where economists think different, and you need to learn to think like economists. When the popular discussion of tax is about who gets what, it's all about redistribution. Who pays more? Who pays less? Tax the rich? No, tax the corporations, which makes no sense because the corporations get all their money from you and me. But on your economist hat, all that you matters. We have no special expertise to know what's fair and who gets what, but we know how to analyze disincentives, and that is where taxes need to be low with few disincentives and to raise revenue from the government. Instead, we have a tax system that is chock full of disincentives, raises very little revenue because it's a Swiss cheese of special carve-outs for special interests, and is trying to do 15 things at once, raise revenue for the government, transfer income, and subsidize all sorts of things without the taxpayers knowing what's going on. Social programs, there's the classic one of you heartless conservative versus you spendthrift liberal. But how do we break out of that? Simple. The problem with social programs is not the cost. The problem is the disincentives. Right now, from about $0 to about $60,000 a year, every dollar you earn once you're in the social program network, you lose $1 worth of benefits. Do I need to tell you what incentives that gives? There's many cliffs. There's many points where you earn literally $1 and you lose your entire health insurance. You earn $1 more and you get kicked out of your affordable housing lottery. So people are smart. They don't earn that extra dollar. Social Security disability is a particularly bad one because once you get disabled, you get a check for life so long as you never work again. Well, people figure out, I guess I'm never going to work again. So that one, again, we need to fix the incentives, and that will also solve, along with immense amounts of growth, bringing us tax revenues. That will solve. We don't have to fight the partisan fight. Trade and immigration, let them in. We have a labor shortage. We have a bankrupt Social Security system. There are a lot of people at the borders anxious to come work, pay taxes. Goodness gracious, what are we doing? And a lot of these things I'm not going to get into financial regulations today because that'll put you all to sleep. We tend to focus on presidents and federal government, but state and local governments are a lot to blame, and a lot of places where there's room to help. And it's starting, and it's as with Nixon to China, it's starting from the left. The Obama administration noticed that occupational licensing is keeping a lot of people out of good employment opportunities. Zoning and building restrictions I mentioned. That's, by the way, they're terrible for the climate. You talk about climate change, everyone wants to subsidize electric cars. How about letting people build houses somewhere near where they work so they don't have to drive in the first place? Zoning restrictions are one of the environmentally worst things we have going, yet the EPA will never think about that. Let me just close here. There's an economics lecture, which I won't give you. People tend to say, oh, this will never happen. There's too many vested interests. And I want to encourage you to believe in democracy. Our country has reformed in the past. Other countries have reformed. The method is the grand bargain. The 1986 tax reform, sadly, the last good one we had as an example. Rather than pick out one person and say, Merchant Marine, you're going to lose the Jones Act and get them to really fight. You just get everyone in the room and say, look, everybody's going to lose a tiny bit, but you're going to make up so much by the other people losing their subsidy that you're in. And then you convert people to making sure the other guy doesn't get his subsidy rather than making sure you keep your own subsidy. You have to believe, if you think we just have to find the great leader to put these ideas, then you're a believer in autocracy, and I'm not. And democracies fundamentally, I've talked to a lot of politicians. They all get this. Our politicians are smart, but their voters don't. The great citizens. Why do we have horrible zoning laws here? Because the great citizens of the city of Palo Alto don't understand what damage it's doing. We need to revive also economic liberty. We have great social and sexual liberty. But your economic liberty is more and more constrained. Your right to buy and sell, hire and fire, as the great Ron Swanson said, here's how it should work. I have an apple. Do you want to buy my apple? Yes, good, done. And let me emphasize property rights. That is really the problem. Rather than asking a government for permission, can I put this business in here? I own the property, I do what I want, subject to law. And we are at an important moment in law. I'm actually now, I'm very nostalgic for regulation. Say, what? You're supposed to hate regulation. No, regulation used to have a rulemaking procedure with public comment and an Administrative Procedures Act and cost benefit analysis and review. Now we just have the agencies write dear colleague letters and everything executive. We seem to, we vote in a king for 4 years, and the first thing each king does is to undo the executive orders of the last one. The way Biden's first executive order was, the Keystone Pipeline, 12 years, nope, we're not doing it. There's a joke. The city of Chicago used to alternate between German and Irish mayors. I don't know if this is true, but it's too good a story to look into. And the first thing each German mayor would do is to ban the sale of whiskey. And the first thing each Irish mayor would do would be to ban the sale of beer and restore the sale of whiskey. That's kind of like where we're going. And let me close with, so the Supreme Court is in the news, as always. Let me encourage you to look past abortion and social issues. And the most important issues are, in fact, the economic issues. The Chevron case. And let me leave you with, if you want to think about something to overturn at the Supreme Court, Wickard v. Filburn. I forget which of Wickard or Filburn was a farmer in California in the 1930s who wished to grow wheat on his own land in order to bake bread for his own family. And he was arrested because he didn't have a federal marketing order to grow wheat. And he went, what do you mean? I'm growing wheat on my own land to feed my own family. Federal government doesn't get to tell me to stop that. Well, the federal government said, yes, you do. And that it was a Commerce Clause question, whether the federal government could do it. Unfortunately, Justice Scalia affirmed, he had a chance to overturn this. He affirmed it when a pot farmer said, I'm growing pot on my own land to smoke my own stuff. You don't have the authority to stop me. And he affirmed it. Well, too bad. These are, I think, the important legal issues, the regulatory issues that I think will lead us to a revival of freedom. So I'm over my time. So there's some resources. Go to the Grumpy Economist blog. I have a webpage with all my more serious writing, or just Google me, and look forward to Free to Grow, the book version. Thank you.
Awesome. We have a little bit of time for questions now, so if anybody has questions, feel free to ask away.
Anyway, I can see you.
I'm not sure how to operate that camera.
I like to see the people who are asking me questions, but I'll go with listening to you.
Sorry about that.
Don't spend a lot of time on tech.
You can, yeah, I'll start out with a question though. You can kind of see me. You talked about how growth is about supply. What do you think about the idea sort of promulgated by people nowadays like Larry Summers, that what we have is secular stagnation, a persistent lack of demand? So growth or low growth can be attributed on the demand side. And so we need to think about demand side policies in order to stimulate the rate of growth.
Yeah, well, notice Larry just woke up. Inflation is the brick wall where demand side fantasies. We just found that supply limit of the U.S. economy, and it's right there where I told you it was all along. And you can't ask, I mean, the modern monetary theorists who kept saying, we can just print more money, and there's always slack in the U.S. economy, and supply will just expand magically. The only reason I guess we weren't this wealthy in 1776 is the government hadn't figured out how to print money. Secular stagnation, what was came and went once in the 1940s, and I think it's gone now. It doesn't make sense when you look theoretically. How can anything monetary? Money is just a change in units. Do you measure it in feet or inches? Now that can have effects for a year or two, but that can't have an effect on long run growth.
Any other questions, Rachel?
So you talked a lot about how growth is through productivity, and productivity comes through good ideas, which usually comes from good institutions and people actually learning how to think and how to function ideas. Do you think there should be any concern that we are moving in a direction where we aren't going to be able to come up with good ideas because our education is lacking, or if there's any way we can go about solving that problem?
Yeah, now a lot of it, we tend to glamorize, the product, the new idea, the computer, the chip, the object, the academic research. But 99% of growth is putting those ideas into practice, not the original idea. The famous story that Xerox invented the mouse, and the user and Steve Jobs went to see Xerox and stole it, figure out what to do with it. But Xerox couldn't figure out what to do with it. It was the ability to embody that idea that made the productivity happen. And so much productivity is just figuring out how to run things better. Southwest Airlines knows how to get people on an airplane in 10 minutes flat. United Airlines still can't do it in 45. It's not that hard, but all the people going to the back with their big bags, and then they can't get them in the overhead compartments because United charges for a lift check bag, and then put the bags back to the front again. There's just simple organizational things that cut down the amount of time a plane sitting on the ground by half an hour. So that's a lot of it. I think there is worry, however. I didn't talk enough about inequality. The schools are kind of being gutted, and Americans are doing terribly on math scores, and now we're getting rid of the tests, and we've decided math is racist. In California, they're going to move out. They're going to get rid of algebra because, and so now nobody's going to know calculus. So the education system is a problem, and that's largely public. Now I got an answer for that too. Milton Friedman's answer: vouchers. More Hillsdales, more places that run their own thing away from the highly politicized education bureaucracy. So it's really important to have smart, well-educated people who actually know what they're doing. I think that's part of our. No, you can import them. There's still good. There's still colleges that teach calculus in India and China. But it would be a lot better if we did it internally. There's the deeper question of, are we really running out of ideas? And that is, Robert Gordon wrote a really perceptive book on this. It was like, you promised me flying cars, and what do I got? 140 characters on Twitter. A lot of what happened was the mastery of electromagnetism with fossil fuels, and that's run out. I don't think that's true, but it is true that ideas are getting harder to find, so Chad Jones, this is the big debate. But I think, how China is so far below the U.S. frontier. So China just needs to learn to do things like the U.S. to be $60,000 per person. Well, I think the U.S. is at least $60,000 below the actual frontier. So even if we don't have lots of new ideas, we could double things, and that'll take care of growth for our lifetimes.
Any other questions, Josh?
I very much enjoy your optimism, and I, of course, have to be pessimistic. Public choice, oh man, and you addressed some of this in your discussion of politics. But hopefully, please give me hope, disprove me. But it seems like it is concerning. Obviously, concentrated benefits, dispersed costs. But I mean, on a deeper level, like that, the Build Back Better bill is how close to getting passed, and it's a few people short of not being passed, and you have, what do you call it? Rent seeking out the wazoo, to put it nicely. I mean, it seems, if anything, increasing with an increasingly entrenched political establishment on both parties. It seems like, I don't know, maybe I'm just pessimistic, but public choice seems pretty darn convincing as to, I don't know how much change can happen, and at least, talks of, from the World Economic Forum about all sorts of, oh yeah, we're gonna have, stakeholder capitalism, whatever that means, and all this crap. It's like, that sure doesn't seem conducive to long-term growth, as opposed to, giving special interest groups more power. Like, why is that not so bad? Like, why is that, like, where is hope to be found, I guess?
Well, I have to admit, it's a bit of a forced optimism. You're supposed to be young and optimistic. I'm supposed to be old. And as I look, politically, so the public choice school, those of you who don't know what this is about, it's a way of looking at politics as sort of self-interested, and it says ideology doesn't matter. It's just a raw grab for power, and the regulators are captured by the industry to protect the industries, and kind of that's the way things are. Now, there are, times of reform. There are times that things get better, which I think the public choice school doesn't really account for well. My model of government has a lot of nefarious stuff going on in there, but there is also the ideas matter. And the ideas of the chattering classes matter. The ideas of the voters matter, as long as we're a democracy. And that, I think, is a check. They notice that they don't just say, we're going to pass a law to raise the prices our business can charge, and the heck with the rest of you. They say, oh, America, apple pie, mom and pop. They have to defend it somehow. So there must be some force to the world of ideas and voters outside there. If the voters understand that this is the Jones Act, the Jones Act, for the rest of you, is an act that requires all ships going from the US to the US to be run by US merchant marine and US flag vessels. It triples the cost of sending anything. We've all understood this is terrible. It's a classic example of rent seeking. Well, if people paid attention and really understood this, it would be hard for politicians to do stuff like this. So I do believe, and Milton Friedman's ideas led, where did deregulation of airlines and railroads come from? Where did the tax reform come from? Milton Friedman's ideas mattered. So I gotta hope but I'm in a dark mood about where we are. We are in a moment of an extreme partisanship. I'm a little more conservative libertarian than some, but I see the dangers on the left, and the danger is not just public choice with powerful economic interests demanding their share of the trough. The danger is authoritarianism, and it comes from the left. We just saw loud calls for the president to ignore a Supreme Court ruling under the idea that the Supreme Court is now politicized, so we can ignore whatever they say. What the hell? There's even an example of this. There is a self-described eco-authoritarian movement. They take the climate catastrophism seriously, and it follows from Greta Thunberg knows how to follow from assumption to conclusion just right. If we are in a cataclysmic danger where the world will burn in 10 years and democracies are dithering, we do not have the time to do anything about this. We must seize power and shove it down their throat. And so actually, I'm darker than you because I don't see just a sort of crony capitalism public choice emerging. I see a Bolshevik revolution style thing emerging. Silencing your freedom of speech, grabbing power in all the machinery of government, taking over and changing the rules so that we can't let those idiots vote in yahoos like Trump again. That is a great danger, I think. So then you got me to be grumpy.
Excellent.
George Shultz he was a wonderful man, and I would say things like this, and he would do essentially slap me in the face and say, "You got to be optimistic."
One more question, if anybody has one.
Yeah, on that last slide you showed, you did have Lochner v. New York listed, and I think there's actually a decent amount of division between like conservatives / libertarians on Lochner. So, on one hand being like, yeah, it was a win for economic freedom. On the other hand, it's kind of like an early version of substantive due process. So I just wanted to know where you fell on that.
The details of Lochner, you caught me on that. So I stand on economic freedom.
Yeah.
And I forgot what the substantive due process clause issue was. Lochner was about wages and hours, right? Were you allowed? Was the baker allowed to voluntarily work 10 hours a day because he was getting some apprenticeship benefits out of it?
Right.
And the state of New York said you can only work 8 hours a day. It turns out it it was back to public choice. The big bakeries wanted to force only 8 hours a day because they knew that's how they could get rid of the competition from little bakeries. That one actually went in the way of freedom, but Lochner was overturned in the Great Depression. So I'm a believer. I think we need economic rights as the right to transact, the right to invest freely, and that those have really been trampled. You're right to buy and sell without the government knowing. I think central bank digital currency, you want to talk about threats to freedom. The government knowing every penny you ever spent and able to sanction you out of the financial system. The Canadian government seizing bank accounts of truckers who were engaged in a peaceful political protest. Whew, heavens to Betsy, there's a classic example of your economic freedom. Your political freedom depends on your economic freedom. So I'll go back to basic principles, and I'll admit I'm not a constitutional lawyer.
All right, very well. Thank you, John Cochrane, and thank you to everybody that came out. Let's give them another hand.
Thank you all.
We'll call it there. Thank you, John.
And I guess whatever you're serving, I don't get. So go get myself a snack.
Thank you.
All right, goodbye, everybody. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.